Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're wrestling with a text that I think is as complex as the human heart itself. We're looking at Psalm 40,
Hmm.
and this psalm, it just captures the entire journey of faith. It moves so dramatically from this song of just exuberant, life-altering thanksgiving
Right.
to a raw, urgent cry for help in the face of a brand new crisis. It is, it's frankly a masterpiece of theological contrast.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Psalm 40 is absolutely pivotal in the Psalter. It wraps up Book 1, which is Psalms 1 through 41, and that's a section, overwhelmingly attributed to King David.
Right, the Davidic Psalms.
Exactly. And the source materials we have from the You Need Faith in Jesus team really highlight that this first book is intensely personal. It lays this foundational principle that trust in God isn't just an emotional reflex. It's a sustained theological commitment, especially when the world feels like it's falling apart.
So our mission today is to really unpack that complexity. We need to understand why David makes this almost jarring shift from celebrating his rescue from the deepest pit to then declaring the true nature of worship,
Hmm.
only to suddenly be overwhelmed again by his enemies and, importantly, his own sin. We want to reveal the profound truth it holds, especially its forward-looking, its prophetic message about the Messiah.
Indeed. And understanding the two major movements is key here. The first, say verses 1 through 10, that's all retrospective. It's looking back at God's miraculous deliverance and then declaring that true obedience. Well, it supersedes ritual sacrifice.
And the second movement.
The second movement, verses 11 through 17, is immediate. It's urgent. It's a sudden, pleading prayer for intervention against both external enemies and his own internal shame. The way David weaves that past triumph into his present despair just perfectly captures the reality of the spiritual life.
Okay, let's get into this then. Let's start with the context that frames this incredible piece of scripture.
Let's do it.
So before we dissect Psalm 40 verse by verse, we really need to zoom out and see where it sits. This section, Psalms 21 through 41, it provides a really crucial backdrop. What are the major themes that the theological analysis from the You Need Faith in Jesus team is emphasizing here?
These themes create a necessary foundation for understanding why Psalm 40 pivots the way it does. The first, and I think the most critical theme, is the block's powerful messianic tones.
Okay.
This entire section is balancing the tension between the expected glorious reign of the Davidic king and, well, the paradoxical reality of the suffering servant.
And we see that tension so acutely when we compare Psalm 21 and 22 right at the beginning of this block. Psalm 22 is, of course, just that agonizing lament of the Messiah on the cross.
Exactly. Psalm 22 kicks off with that cry that echoes through history. My, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me? And from the words of my roaring. That's Psalm 22.1 KJV. The description is just visceral. The mockery, the physical agony, the pierced hands and feet. It's all there.
The parting of the garments.
The parting of the garments. It is the ultimate picture of suffering endured on behalf of others.
Yet, almost immediately after that, this profound suffering is set right next to royal triumph.
Precisely. You look at Psalms 21 and 24, and they focus entirely on the triumphant king. Psalm 21, for example, prophetically celebrates the king's victory, declaring, Thou hast given him his heart's desire, and hast not withholden the request of his lips. Selah. That's Psalm 21.2, KJV.
So how does that connect to Psalm 40?
Well, the You Need Faith in Jesus team points out that Psalm 40's prophetic center, this focus on obedience over sacrifice, it fits perfectly into this dual messianic framework. Only the king who suffered in obedience could secure the full reign.
So it's not just about David's personal life, it's a constant awareness that his life is foreshadowing a greater king who would encompass both that deep suffering and the ultimate victory.
That's correct. And the second major theme you see in this block is praise born of deliverance. It's a recurring cycle. Praise is rarely, just for the sake of it. It's a thankful response to being rescued from the edge.
A great example of that is Psalm 30, right? With that beautiful promise that everyone clings to in dark times.
Yes. In Psalm 30, David says, For his anger endureth but a moment. In his favor is life. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. That's Psalm 30.5, KJV.
A classic.
And then you have Psalm 32, which celebrates the joy of forgiveness after David finally confessed his sin concerning Bathsheba and Uriah. He talks about his misery when he was silent. When I kept silence, my bones waxed old through my roaring all the day long. Psalm 32.3 KJV.
So those examples show that the deliverance we see at the start of Psalm 40, David being pulled from the pit, is just him following this established pattern. Suffering, crying out, deliverance, and then public testimony.
Mm-hmm. And finally, this block has these deeper reflections on suffering. The Psalms here are brutally honest about the human condition under duress. I mean, think about Psalm 38, where David describes the intense isolation of having friends and family stand far away from his ailment. He says, "My lovers and my friends stand aloof from my sore, and my kinsmen stand afar off." Psalm 38.11 KJV.
That's heartbreaking. And then Psalm 39 emphasizes that feeling of just utter frailty, the brevity of life. David says, "Behold, thou hast made my days as an handbreadth, and mine age is as nothing before thee. Verily every man at his best state is altogether vanity. Selah." Psalm 39.5 KJV. It's this profound moment of existential reckoning.
And that honesty, it just reaches its painful peak in Psalm 41, which comes right before our text. It deals with the agony of betrayal by a close friend, a passage Jesus later quotes regarding Judas. The emotional scope here is just vast.
So Psalm 40 really acts as a kind of synthesis then. It begins with deliverance, like Psalm 30. It moves into the core nature of worship, that wisdom element, and then it plunges right back into this renewed experience of intense suffering and betrayal, like Psalms 38 and 41.
And the story of David being pulled from a pit, whether it's literal or metaphorical, it serves not only as his personal history, but as this timeless spiritual analogy for salvation. It makes the psalm instantly relatable to anyone who's ever felt just completely overwhelmed.
All right, let's turn now to the opening testament of faith, the celebration of that victory that frames David's entire message. And it starts with what he had to do before the rescue. Wait.
Yes, the principle of patient waiting is right there in verse 1, and it's so critical. It says, "I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry." Psalm 40.1, KJV.
You know, the English phrase waited patiently can sound a little passive, almost like just sitting on a bench. But the linguistic notes from the source material emphasize that the Hebrew word, quava, carries a much more dynamic weight, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Kaba means more than just enduring time. It implies this active, hopeful expectation. The root of the word means to twist or bind together, suggesting David was actively winding his hope and trust around God, even as his circumstances were trying to pull him apart. It's a choice.
It's a resolute choice to stand firm.
Right, to look toward God's eventual action, even when the timeline is completely uncertain.
So David's reward wasn't just that God heard him, but that God acted with this intimate personal attention.
Precisely. He inclined unto me. That phrase signifies a deliberate bending down, an act of personal close attention to hear his distress. It's the complete opposite of a distant deity just tossing a generic solution toward earth. This is the creator focusing intently on one struggling human being.
And that personal intervention is described in some pretty vivid, almost horrifying detail in verse 2. It really establishes the severity of the crisis he faced.
The imagery is stunning. It just speaks to complete desperation. He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. Psalm 40.2, KJV.
The horrible pit, or the pit of roaring, as some interpretations suggest, and that miry clay, they're classic biblical metaphors for utter despair, chaos, and near death. The pit suggests a cistern or a dungeon, a place you just cannot climb out of without help.
It signifies a situation where escape is impossible through human effort. It really brings to mind the prophet Jeremiah's situation, as noted in our research materials, when he was cast into a cistern with no water, only mud, and he just sank into the mire, completely helpless.
Oh, yeah.
The text is Jeremiah 38.6, KJV. Then took they Jeremiah and cast him into the dungeon. And they let down Jeremiah with cords. And in the dungeon there was no water, but mire. So Jeremiah sunk in the mire.
That comparison just perfectly captures the physical and spiritual desperation David must have been feeling. He was sinking, he was powerless.
And this is where the "you need faith in Jesus" team framework for total security becomes so visible. God's intervention is comprehensive. It's a three-part rescue. First, he rescues you from the pit and clay. Second, he places you on a secure foundation, the rock, a metaphor for stability and for Christ himself.
And the third part?
The third part is the establishment of stable steps. Establish my goings, meaning David's path forward is now secured and stable. The chaos is replaced by divine order.
That immense shift from sinking in muck to standing firm on a rock, it offers a really powerful practical action for anyone listening. When despair hits, the first step is to actively declare God as your rock. You have to trust the principle that God is the source of security, not your fleeting circumstances.
And this deliverance, being so complete, it naturally produces a public response in verse 3. Deliverance is never meant to be a secret.
No.
It says, "And he hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear and shall trust in the Lord. Psalm 40.3, KJV.
I love that phrase, a new song. It's a testament to the fact that God didn't just change David's situation, he changed his internal disposition. His experience was so transforming that he needed a new melody, a new vocabulary to express his praise.
And what really stands out here is the purpose of this public witness, which the You Need Faith in Jesus team emphasizes, is fundamentally evangelistic. David's personal testimony of God's rescue is designed to encourage others. When many shall see it, their response is twofold. First, reverence and awe, fear for the God who acts decisively in history. And second, they're moved to place their own trust in the Lord.
So a personal victory immediately becomes a means of recruiting and strengthening the entire community of believers. It's this chain reaction: crisis, rescue, testimony, conversion.
Absolutely. And David then broadens the theme, defining the source of true blessing and reflecting on God's nature in verses 4 and 5.
Verse 4 says, "Blessed is that man that maketh the Lord his trust, and respecteth not the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies." Psalm 40.4, KJV.
This reiterates a crucial wisdom theme you see throughout the Psalter. True security is not found in human institutions or strength, but in trusting God. It's a clear choice. Faith in the Lord versus rejecting the pride of men and false ideologies or lies, basically rejecting any solution that doesn't originate from God.
And verse 5 provides the grand, overwhelming reason for that trust: the immeasurable nature of God's care. "Many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works which thou hast done, and thy thoughts which are to usward. They cannot be reckoned up in order unto thee. If I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered." Psalm 40.5, KJV.
David is just overwhelmed trying to count God's wonderful works.
And it's the second half of that verse that strikes me as so profoundly intimate and deeply theological: God's thoughts which are to usward.
This is a concept that really requires us to pause. David isn't talking about some generic goodwill. He's proclaiming that the sovereign God of the universe directs detailed, personal, and continual good thoughts toward individual believers.
And he says these thoughts are more than can be numbered. This confirms a vast, continuous, and highly personal providence. We so often limit our view of God's care to just our immediate, visible needs.
But this phrase just expands that vision immensely. These are thoughts about our past, our present, and our future thoughts rooted in an eternal plan. Later, Scripture confirms the depth of this idea. For example, Isaiah speaks of the transcendence of God's thoughts. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." That's Isaiah 55.828 KJV.
So if God's thoughts are so far above ours in scope and depth, yet they are directed to usward, that means his plan for us encompasses this massive, unending complexity that we could never fully grasp. It's the ultimate guarantee of security.
It is the anchor of hope. The You Need Faith in Jesus team analysis specifically connects this concept to Jeremiah 29.11, where God declares, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end." Jeremiah 29.RO KJV. David is essentially glimpsing the scope of God's eternal, unwavering commitment to the good of his people centuries before Jeremiah wrote those famous words.
Wow. So part I firmly establishes God as the personal, powerful, and infinitely thoughtful deliverer. But now we move into the truly revolutionary center of the song.
This next section, verses 6 through 10, this is the pivotal core. David moves beyond just thanksgiving for a past rescue to address the very nature of the relationship God desires with humanity. It radically redefines what God values in worship, and it anticipates the new covenant.
Okay, let's look at verse 6, where David makes an astonishing realization, especially coming from the king responsible for maintaining the entire sacrificial system of Israel.
He essentially demotes the efficacy of ritual. He says, "Sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire. Mine ears hast thou opened. Burnt offering and sin offering hast thou not required." Psalm 40.6 KJV.
I mean, that sounds almost heretical in the context of the Mosaic Law. David is stating that the very system God commanded, the meticulous sacrifices, were not what God ultimately desired. He realized that outward ritual is secondary to internal devotion and submission.
And the key theological phrase that replaces the sacrifices is, "Mine ears hast thou opened." We really need to spend time here, as this is a profound statement of covenant fidelity. Linguistically, historically, this phrase is a direct allusion to the law regarding a Hebrew servant.
This is the law in Exodus 21, isn't it?
Correct. The law in Exodus 21.5-6, KJV, says that if a servant loves his master and his family and chooses to stay for life instead of going free after 6 years, the master must take him to the doorpost, and then his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever.
That makes the phrase, "mine ears hast thou opened," profoundly powerful. He's not talking about passive listening. He is stating he has willingly entered into a lifelong covenant of servitude and loyalty. He's choosing submission over freedom, choosing to be perpetually bound to God's will.
It means, I choose submission and loyalty as the ultimate act of worship, and that replaces the need for animal blood. The sacrifice God truly desires is the sacrifice of the will.
Hmm.
And this realization, it just sets the stage for the enormous prophetic moment that follows in verses 7 and 8.
This is where David's words transcend his own experience and declare the mission of the ultimate deliverer.
He says, Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, I delight to do thy will, O my God. Yea, thy law is within my heart. Psalm 40.7-8 KJV.
Wow.
For David, this was a statement of profound personal commitment. But the "you need faith in Jesus" team analysis places tremendous weight on this section because the New Testament applies the entire segment directly to Jesus Christ's incarnation and sacrifice.
The writer of Hebrews takes this prophetic thread and uses it to establish the superiority of Christ's sacrifice over the law's rituals. This provides the ultimate theological context.
We have to look at the full citation. It's indispensable. Hebrews 10.5-7 KJV makes the connection explicit. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he saith, Sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, but a body hast thou prepared me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin thou hast had no pleasure. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God.
That transforms David's poetic musing into the pre-existent Christ declaring his mission before the foundation of the world. It's the ultimate statement of obedience.
It is the fulfillment. The law's sacrifices were temporary. They just covered sins and needed endless repetition. Christ's perfect body, prepared for him by the Father, offered the single ultimate act of obedience and submission, replacing forever the need for animal sacrifices. His delight to do thy will was the true and final act of worship.
And the phrase, "thy law is within my heart," in that messianic context, it points to Christ's inherent purity. He didn't just know the law, he embodied it. He was able to accomplish God's will perfectly because there was no conflict between his will and the Father's.
And this connection provides one of the strongest practical actions for us regarding worship. If the ultimate act of worship was perfect obedience, then our own true faith has to be anchored in internalizing God's standards, the law within the heart, and striving for daily submission, not just relying on external religious duties.
Worship without willing obedience is empty ritual.
Exactly. And this internal commitment then generates the necessary external response, which David describes in verses 9 and 10. True, heartfelt worship is infectious and it has to be public.
Yes.
He says he is compelled to public witness. I have preached righteousness in the great congregation. Lo, I have not refrained my lips, O Lord, thou knowest. I have not hid thy righteousness within my heart. I have declared thy faithfulness and thy salvation. I have not concealed thy loving kindness and thy truth from the great congregation. Psalm 40.9-10 KJV.
He's using this powerful series of synonyms to describe God's character. He's not just giving a vague testimonial. He's preaching about God's specific core attributes: righteousness, faithfulness, salvation, loving kindness, and truth.
And the emphasis here is on transparency. He uses negative framing. I have not refrained my lips, I have not hid, I have not concealed, to stress the totality of his public declaration. He hasn't held back anything about God's goodness. This affirms a core principle of the "you need faith in Jesus" team instruction. Our personal experiences of God's faithfulness are meant to encourage and instruct the wider community.
So part I ends on the highest possible theological high note. But the spiritual life, as we know, is not a straight line from victory to victory.
And now we face the dramatic shift. The transition is instantaneous, it's stark. David moves from celebrating a past, comprehensive victory to dealing with a severe, current crisis. And this transition is perhaps the most realistic theological observation in the psalm. Past victory does not grant you immunity from future trouble. The spiritual battle is continuous.
It almost feels like a new psalm has begun, but it's intentional. The memory of God's faithfulness immediately becomes the foundation for his desperate, current plea for mercy in verse 11.
He begins by grounding his plea entirely in God's character. He's not demanding based on his own merit, but on divine essence. Withhold not thou thy tender mercies from me, O Lord. Let thy loving kindness and thy truth continually preserve me. Psalm 40.11 KJV.
He clings to God's tender mercies and loving kindness that he found, that covenantal loyalty that defines God's relationship with his people, and he needs these not just now, but continually. This confirms the ongoing rather than static nature of his reliance.
And this reliance is desperately needed because the intensity just ramps up immediately in verse 12, revealing the crushing dual nature of his present crisis, external attacks, and internal failure.
David confronts both the consequences of the wicked and the consequences of his own actions.
Yes. For innumerable evils have compassed me about. Mine iniquities have taken hold upon me, so that I am not able to look up. They are more than the hairs of mine head. Therefore my heart faileth me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Psalm 40.111-13 KJV.
The external pressure is the innumerable evils.
So the crippling internal pressure is that his own iniquities have taken hold upon me. David makes a confession here that is just profoundly raw. He doesn't just face trouble. He realizes his own sinfulness is contributing to his misery and his emotional paralysis.
And this is where I want to press on the theological tension a bit. If David was just rescued from the horrible pit in part I and offered a new song of praise, why is he suddenly so completely paralyzed by his innumerable evils and his own iniquities that can't even look up? Does salvation not eliminate the memory and consequence of shame?
That's an excellent question that goes right to the heart of the journey of sanctification. The deliverance in part I was justification, the rescue from death and the pit. But part 3 is the reality of living in a fallen world after justification. David is still King David. He's still prone to sin, he's still facing enemies, and he still needs daily cleansing.
So the memory of past deliverance gives him the courage to confess this new wave of sin, but it doesn't eliminate the pain of it.
Precisely. And he expresses that pain with devastating imagery. His sins are more than the hairs of mine head. This leads to profound, visceral shame. He is not able to look up, avoiding the gaze of God and man and spiritual collapse where his heart faileth me.
That honesty is so important.
It's therapeutically crucial. The comparison with the earlier Psalms is really insightful here. Remember Psalm 32, where David tried to hide his sin and his life became miserable. In Psalm 40, he chooses transparency. He recognizes that full restoration requires confession and relying utterly on God's mercy, not self-justification. And that's a crucial practical action for anyone listening. When in crisis, practice honesty. The external battle is often less formidable than the internal struggle until it's confessed.
Following this raw confession, his reliance on God's mercy immediately leads him to a request for divine action against his external foes in verses 14 and 15.
He moves into an imprecatory plea, asking God to thwart the malice of his persecutors. Let them be ashamed and confounded together that seek after my soul to destroy it. Let them be driven backward and put to their shame that wish me evil. Let them be desolate for a reward of their shame that say unto me, Aha, aha. Psalm 40.1-15 KJV.
That taunt, aha, aha, is just the ultimate expression of malicious pleasure at someone else's misfortune. David isn't just asking for protection. He's asking God to turn the tables, to have God's justice humiliate the mockers.
Theologically, he's appealing to God to execute justice because these enemies are actively hindering the work of God by trying to destroy his servant. He's appealing for God's righteousness to prevail over malice and deceit. He's trusting that God is the ultimate champion and judge, much like the pleas you see throughout Psalm 35. The petition isn't rooted in personal spite, but in the desire to see God's moral order restored.
But the psalm refuses to end on that note of his enemy's defeat or his own despair. It pivots one final time in the closing verses to this confident personal assurance and communal hope.
This is the comforting climax, and it demonstrates how genuine faith operates under pressure. David shifts focus away from the specifics of his trouble to the joy of his fellow believers, providing a context for his own assurance. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. Let such as love thy salvation say continually, The Lord be magnified. But I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinketh upon me. Thou art my help and my deliverer. Make no tarrying, O my God. Psalm 40.16-17 KJV.
He prays that those who seek God, the community of faith, will be magnified. But then he brings it right back to his own contrasting state. But I am poor and needy.
This declaration of neediness is key. It's an honest self-assessment of vulnerability and lack of power. David has no resources left, no strength, no merit, no internal fortitude to pull himself out of this new pit. Yet the ultimate assurance immediately follows. Yet the Lord thinketh upon me.
So despite being poor and needy, the vast, immeasurable thoughts of God that he celebrated back in verse 5 are still directed at him personally. This provides an immense, unshakable foundation of security, even when delay is experienced. It's the ultimate confidence, connecting directly to the New Testament counsel in 1 Peter 5.7 KJV, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you.
And the psalm concludes with an urgent yet trusting request for immediate intervention. Make no tarrying, oh my God. David knows God is his help and deliverer. He simply asks him to act swiftly. The entire journey moves from patient waiting, quava, in verse 1, to urgent waiting, make no tarrying, in verse 17, reflecting the continuous dynamic tension of faith.
That structural balance, beginning with patience rewarded, ending with urgency confessed, it just beautifully frames the ongoing nature of spiritual dependence.
So we've journeyed through the heights of praise and the depths of sorrow within Psalm 40. The profound overall lesson, as synthesized by the You Need Faith in Jesus team, is that faith isn't a single event. It's a dynamic, continuous cycle of remembering God's past faithfulness, maintaining present obedience, and crying out in future trouble.
Let's pull out those practical applications that translate this ancient text into actionable principles for our lives today. We can break these down into, say, 4 core takeaways.
The first is fundamental. Prioritize obedience. The analysis of verses 6 through 8 is crystal clear. God desires a committed heart and a spirit of obedience over mere ritual or activity. David showed this through the metaphor of the pierced ear, and Christ fulfilled it through perfect submission.
So the specific action for the listener is to conduct a kind of worship audit. Where is your time and energy being spent? Are you merely performing religious duties that leave the heart unchanged? Or are you actively seeking to know and do God's will with delight? If there's no delight in obedience, the ritual is empty.
That's a powerful challenge. The second takeaway, drawn from verses 3, 9, and 10, is be a public witness. Your deliverance is not intended to be a private blessing. It is a new song, meant to inspire others to trust God.
Which means the practical step is simple, but difficult for a lot of people. Share your testimony. When God rescues you from a pit, you are required to publicly declare his faithfulness. This isn't boasting, it's evangelism, moving others to fear and shall trust in the Lord, just as David witnessed.
The third takeaway addresses the intense honesty of part 3. Practice honesty and repentance. When we're overwhelmed by trouble, we must, like David, be honest about our internal failures as well as the external problems.
David's willingness to confront his iniquities that were more than the hairs of mine head in verse 12 is the model. The practical step here is critical. Do not minimize the weight of your sin. Confess it fully, honestly acknowledging its capacity to paralyze, and immediately rely on God's tender mercies for both forgiveness and restoration. Trying to hide or rationalize it just prolongs the misery.
And finally, the fourth takeaway, which is the ultimate source of comfort in distress. Find hope in God's thoughts. This is what anchors us when circumstances are at their weakest. David, when feeling poor and needy, anchored himself in the truth that the Lord thinketh upon me, from verse 17.
The practical action here is radical reliance. In moments of intense vulnerability or delay, when God seems slow to act, we have to choose to anchor ourselves not in what we feel, but in the unshakable truth that the all-powerful Creator is actively, personally thinking about our well-being and is moving toward us as our help and deliverer. This is the truth that provides immense confidence and security.
Psalm 40 is just a tremendous guide to the reality of the spiritual life. It affirms that the cycle of faith involves both immense joy and profound despair, but that our ultimate security, even when our sins feel overwhelming, is rooted in the messianic fulfillment. Christ, whose ultimate obedience secured forgiveness for all sin and provides the perfect immovable rock upon which our lives are eternally established.
A truly profound exploration of an incredibly deep chapter.
The journey from the horrible pit to the sure rock, and then back into the new mire of human weakness, is the continuous pattern of the Christian life. Psalm 40 teaches us that our reliance on God is continuous, and our ultimate security is found in the one whose law was within his heart and who accomplished God's will perfectly.
Our sincere gratitude goes out to the You Need Faith in Jesus team for compiling the insightful source materials and theological framework that guided this extensive exploration into the complexity and depth of Psalm 40.
To solidify your understanding of this lesson, be sure to use the flashcards to review key terms and then take the quiz. Passing the quiz will mark this lesson as complete.